The show starts in 3, 2, 1, go.
What is going on, CaneSport, and good morning to you all. It is Tuesday, November 12th. I'm Izubee Charles, joined by Stephen Wagner, and thank you for starting your day off with us with Good Morning CaneSport. We have a ton of Miami Hurricanes news, so we'll get things rolling. But first, make sure to stay tuned on the website later today, CaneSport Live, as Gary Furman, Matt Shadell, and company talk with the fans and discuss, a busy, hectic week that was last week in Hurricanes football. Also, Matt does a great job of breaking down the defensive issues that have been popping up all season long, so make sure to check out that article as well. And we have something on the site from yesterday with Michael Irvin talking about Miami's weekend, so make sure to check that out. But Steven, we have to address the elephant in the room. Miami's loss against Georgia Tech last weekend, one that we did not expect or wanted to see whatsoever. I know Matt and Gary have done a great job covering that from their angle, but we're going to take this over from a recruiting angle. I've had the chance to speak with a few Miami commits, and those guys are all still very solid on commitments. They don't see that loss as a big issue. One guy that I spoke with in particular, Drake Stubbs, the highest ranked guy in that 2025 class, I said, hey, man, what are your thoughts about, seeing Miami lose to Georgia Tech? He said, listen, things happen in the season. These guys are still 9-1. I see this as, an opportunity for me to make an impact in that secondary. Because we've seen, how those defensive backs have struggled this year. And with a guy like O.J. Federico, a true freshman and arguably the best cornerback shining, Drake Stubbs says, hey, I think I can come in, in December when I enroll early and make a big impact. And, also caught up with 2025 offensive line commit Jaden Wilkerson, as well as 2025 defensive line commit Dante Simpson, who said, hey, this loss is something that this team can, use to improve on and kind of regain focus. It's been a roller coaster for a season, so now these guys have kind of cooled down a little bit heading into this bye week. So make sure to check out what we have on the Miami commits and what they're saying, following that Georgia Tech loss. But Steven, you had the chance to catch up with some guys committed to Miami and not committed to Miami following this Georgia Tech loss. Just, what's the general consensus with recruits, thinking about Miami after, falling to the Yellow Jackets this past weekend?
Yeah, no one's hitting the panic button after this loss, kind of unlike Miami's loss to Georgia Tech last year, where the game was literally won, but Miami found a way to lose. Georgia Tech definitely outplayed Miami, but everyone acknowledged that this is only one game. You can have one game where you make a mistake, and Miami's goals are all still completely in front of them. They still haven't lost a home game this year. They should have a path to get to the ACC title game. They definitely can still reach the college football playoff. And once they're in the playoff, at least on offense, they have the talent to go out there and compete for a national championship. I mean, now what you want to say about the defense being an Achilles heel, I mean, that's certainly a fair criticism, but all of Miami's recruits recognize that all of their goals are still completely in front of them. I don't think this game really changes anything for anyone that Miami's really after, especially in a week that was, kind of a little bit, weirder in college football. LSU getting absolutely killed by Alabama at home. Florida State, I mean, just, shit completely hitting the fan with the Seminoles, going to South Bend and playing Notre Dame. And then obviously Florida just getting absolutely crushed on the road against Texas. I think they were down 42 points or something like that at one point. Miami is trying to flip kids from all three of those schools. And so, in a weekend like this, I really don't think that Miami's loss really has very much of an impact at all in recruiting. But, it's always possible that this could end up having some sort of an effect after the fact. But, I don't think we'll know that for quite a while. And hindsight's always 20/20. But right now I'm feeling pretty confident that this isn't moving the needle too much.
Yeah, this weekend in college football for the Sunshine State wasn't too sunny. I think every single Division I Power 5 or every single Division I, FBS and FCS Florida school lost this weekend. So Florida schools didn't have the best weekend, looking to recover next weekend and so on from there. But, Stephen mentioned Miami working on flipping, guys from the likes of Florida State, guys from the likes of University of Florida. And, one big name that comes to mind that's been very, very active on social media recently has been 5-star offensive line commit Solomon Thomas. This past weekend, Florida State kind of cleaned house. Their 1-9 record. Mike Norvell made some changes, in particular firing offensive coordinator and offensive line coach Alex Atkins, who played a huge role in Solomon Thomas's commitment to Florida State. He tweeted yesterday something saying, "Hey, you guys made a big mistake by firing my coach," which kind of got some people, lurking on his profile. He made a few other tweets, but Stephen, you exchanged text with his mom and had a good pulse on that situation as it's developed in recent weeks. Just what are your thoughts on that Solomon Thomas commitment, still committed to Florida State, but looks like other programs trying to poach him from the Seminoles 2025 class?
Yeah, the 5-star was definitely shook by Alex Atkins firing. Now, he and Alex were very, very close. Atkins was a huge reason why Solomon committed to FSU to begin with, and a really big reason, I think, quite frankly, why he hadn't decommitted sooner, considering how poorly this season had gone for FSU and really how bad the trajectory is for the team moving forward. I think that, without Atkins, I think that, Alex Atkins is to FSU kind of what Corey Raymond or was to FSU, kind of like what Corey Raymond was to LSU. And that is, a huge reason why one or two of these really top tier talents hadn't completely jumped off the boat, even whenever the season had gone a little bit sideways. There were moments this year where it looked like maybe Miami was getting a little bit of traction, but it felt like nothing really was ever able to come of it. But now that Alex Atkins has gone ahead and been fired, I mean, I think that Solomon and his mom are really kind of trying to figure out, what the next step is going to be. Because I quite frankly thought that as long as Alex Atkins was at Florida State, there was going to be a pretty good chance that Solomon Thomas was going to stick with FSU as well, no matter how bad the outlook looked, because that really was how close Solomon and Atkins were. With Atkins no longer there, I definitely think that this is anyone's recruitment. I think, I don't think it would surprise me at all if he ended up at LSU, because LSU's been pushing for him pretty hard and been trying to get him on campus. Like I said, he was in communication with Miami to potentially visit for the Florida State game, although that ended up not panning out. Nothing really came of those discussions. I don't know if he's going to get back to campus at some point this fall yet or not before the early signing period. I truly have no idea. ESPN reported that Solomon Thomas got to Miami for the FSU game. That report is not correct. That is wrong. So Miami has yet to host Solomon Thomas on campus since the spring, whenever he came down for, I think he came down for the spring game, if I'm not mistaken, or if my memory serves me correct. But I know that he got to Miami back in April. I'm really not totally certain where this recruitment is going to go now. And it sounds like Solomon himself isn't really totally certain where it's going to go yet either, because talking to his mom said that, they kind of need a few days to figure out what the next step is going to be. Now, he did tweet out, he did tweet out that FSU, they were going to regret firing Atkins, and he posted a photo of him and Atkins on what I'm pretty sure was his official visit. And then Monday evening he went ahead and tweeted out, if you're not talking about business, then I don't want to talk. #Go Noles. I personally, my gut feeling tells me that it's a front. I think that there are a lot more uncertainties than there are certainties right now. I feel like I'd be a little bit surprised if he did end up sticking with FSU, but where he's going to end up is now the next question.
Yeah, I feel like I'm using that term committed with Solomon Thomas pretty loosely, after the fact, where he tweets out, you guys are going to regret firing my coach, and, or if you're not talking business. I think that just screams, hey, come at me right now. Let's see, who has, obviously in this day and age, NIL, who has the best, potential NIL package, and, all that good stuff. So that's definitely going to be a recruitment that takes a lot of twists and turns in the next, few weeks, with the national signing period coming up on December 4th. And man, does that, they keep getting closer and closer and closer. Miami's still working on flipping a lot of guys, and I kind of want to stay in state, talk about another program that Miami's looking to poach, a few guys away from, before December 4th comes around. being local Booker T. Washington 4-star cornerback Ben Hanks, and wide receiver Vernell Brown, who it's kind of been a little bit quiet on his front, but Miami thinks, this one may come down to the wire. Obviously, Vernell Brown has those deep connections with the University of Florida. Same with Ben Hanks. Both are legacy recruits committed to the program right now. But in recent news, Billy Napier just came out that Billy Napier was going to be remaining the coach of the University of Florida. Their AD said, hey, we're sticking with him, which I think was a smart move on their end, not to lose, the rest of their class and kind of see that fall apart, similar to how Florida State's class is falling apart. And with guys like DJ Lagway on the roster right now, I think they're just trying to keep everything intact. Steven, I just kind of want to get your quick thoughts on, Ben Hanks, Vernell Brown, and just the impact you think, keeping Billy Napier may have on the way Miami recruits those guys, or Miami's chance, is really still alive in those recruitments.
I think it moves the needle a lot more for Vernell Brown in favor of Florida than it does for Ben Hanks. Vernell just likes Billy Napier. He really does like the guy. And I think, kind of like with DJ Lagway, Scott Strickland's statement saying, hey, we're going to go ahead and, keep Billy. We're going to keep this guy that I know you really like. I do think that does help Vernell Brown a little bit because, through the ups and downs that Florida's had, and I guess through the downs that Florida's had, because they haven't really had any ups the last 3 years. Vernell really has believed in Billy Napier. I think he likes him as a coach. I think he likes him as a person. He's been on campus a crap load of times. And he always kind of gave me the feel of kind of one of those dudes who I always think I kind of felt, he kind of gave you the impression that he wanted to be a Gator, sort of regardless of who the head coach actually was. And I think that I still kind of get that impression from him. But, I think if Scott Strickland is trying to, give some signal that there's going to be stability at the university, I think that probably only makes Vernell lean a little bit heavier to Florida. I think he's definitely going to be a Gator. I don't think Miami's going to totally give up on him just because he is one of those players that's that good. And, he doesn't really bullshit a lot. He doesn't really lead coaches astray. I mean, he really is a pretty genuine kid, and, he's pretty transparent. He doesn't he doesn't jerk programs around. So, if a school's going to go after him, I mean, for the most part, they're going to have an idea of kind of where they really do sit with him. I think that's the case with Miami. I think that, I really do think that Florida probably is the school to beat here, but I don't think that Miami's just going to totally throw in the towel with a month left until signing day, and Florida coming off I think a 32-point loss over the weekend, and then Florida still having to play LSU and Ole Miss and having to beat one of those two teams in order just to get to a bowl game. I think Miami's still going to try to capitalize on, maybe some of the failures that, Florida could potentially end up happening. Although, the LSU game certainly seems beatable, or that certainly seems winnable. But Ben Hanks, on the other hand, I think that I think that the Napier move doesn't really move the needle quite as much with Ben Hanks. I think the biggest thing with Hanks is really kind of the legacy deal with his father. I mean, now, I don't think that his father has been a guy who's been, like really, really pushy or kind of said, hey, I really think that you should go to Florida. I think you should follow in my footsteps. I don't think that his dad has said that, but I do think that, Florida's recruiting pitch of saying, hey man, come be an all SEC talent, just like your dad was. Your dad was great here. Your dad left a legacy at Florida. Why don't you leave a legacy too? I do think that that's something that resonates with him. I've been saying for a while that I'm kind of 60-40 leaning toward him flipping to Miami. I still think the Canes are going to have a chance to flip him. He's visited Miami for 2 games already this fall. The Hurricanes are still pushing very, very hard. Miami is definitely going to have a chance, but I think that this recruitment is still pretty tight because I still think that Ben himself is a little bit conflicted. Because just whenever it feels like he's leaning one way, you hear something or you get a feel that kind of makes you feel like he's, it really is kind of still up for grabs. It really is a two-team race between Miami and Florida. Obviously, he's still committed to Florida for a reason, but Miami really is right there, and I'm expecting them to put all hands on deck over the next month.
Yeah, I'm super excited to see how this thing ends up over these next 4 weeks, man, because we've seen, Mario Cristobal's 2 full recruiting cycles. That late November, early December push is something that he's kind of made a name for himself by, going into, other programs, classes, and kind of, picking and choosing what he wants. And one thing that I wanted kind of to talk about this year is very, very different from these last 2 cycles, because I wrote this on the board. I said, hey, Miami's been recruiting with a 5-7 record and a 7-5 record these last 2 years and still landed a bunch of elite talents, a bunch of top recruits. Now you guys are 9-1. They have a great opportunity to finish the year off with, 11 wins, the most under Mario Cristobal since he arrived in Miami. And hey, you see a lot of, freshman guys making an impact on both sides of the ball. Like I mentioned earlier in the show, guys like OJ Frederic, tight end Elijah Lofton, and, guys from the 2023 class, Francis Mariano, Ruben Bain, playing huge roles for this team. So they have a lot to sell to these kids. And I think this is going to be very, very interesting, November and December. And Steven, these next 2 weeks is something I actually wanted to ask you about as well, too. Miami has a bye week, so obviously they're going to be on the road recruiting, sending out assistants, catching up with 2025 guys, 2026 guys as well. And then Wake Forest, the last home game of the year. We already have a few guys who've locked in visits to see that game. Zion Ely, the number 1 prospect in the 2026 class. Kellen Wy, a 4-star 2025 linebacker, taking a official visit there. And a few more guys that, we're expecting to see there as well. So, Steven, before we kind of move on to the next part of the show, just want to ask you, how important do you think these 2 weeks with the bye week and the final home game will be for, Miami making that last-ditch effort, that last push, for some of the top targets in the 2025 class?
Yeah, expecting some of Miami's coaches to go ahead and hit the recruiting trail this week. This is probably going to be the last chance that coaches are going to have to, make to make in-school visits to kids who aren't just immediately in their backyard, who aren't just, like a very, very short drive away. Then next week, that really is going to, I think, probably be the last chance to make a huge, final impression with a lot of these athletes. Kellen Wy obviously is probably going to be the biggest one. Zion Ely, he's the number 1 recruit in 2026, but Kellen Wy is a 2025 guy, and 2025 is all you care about right now. And as far as, guys left on Miami's board, Kellen Wy is as big as anyone that Miami is still hoping to nab. The Hurricanes are, it felt like they were doing very, very well for him for a long time. We really felt like he was a strong Miami lean. I was thinking to myself, like, man, I'm ready to go ahead and put in an RPM for this kid, as soon as he goes ahead and schedules that official visit. Well, then he turns around, he announces a top 10, he announces an official visit to Texas. It really just kind of threw me for a loop. I still am leaning a little bit toward Miami with him. But I'm really curious to see kind of I'm really curious to see just how big of an impression Miami can make during a weekend game official visit, because Miami doesn't really do in-season OVs. They don't like to do game week OVs because the staff would prefer to just be totally focused on the actual game, as opposed to having to run in, make sure that a recruit's having a good time, make sure that his parents are enjoying themselves too, just really, just trying to give a recruit the amount of attention that's required if you really want to do an official visit the right way. And, that's obviously something that Mario Cristobal and his staff take a lot of pride in. We'll get a much better feel, I think, for kind of where Kellen Wy sits with Miami, probably a little bit later in the week, maybe at the start of next week, because I think that right now, Kellen Wy, obviously, Texas seems like they did a pretty good job on his official visit. And so Kellen Wy is obviously, going to be riding a little bit of a post-visit high. So I think once the dust settles a little bit, we'll have kind of a better idea of where Miami exactly sits. I do think it's going to be very, very meaningful that Miami looks like right now they are going to get his last visit before he goes ahead and makes a decision. So being able to get the last say, I do think is going to be really, really important for Miami.
Yeah, I was gonna say that before you did. I was gonna say getting that, that last taste in his mouth, that last final impression, after seeing Texas and after seeing a handful of other schools this fall, because this year Miami was the first school he visited since the summer, early this year when he got down, to Hard Rock Stadium, and they're getting the last, visit to us too. So I think Miami's gonna try to put their best foot forward and land Kellen Wy, a guy that they're very, very high on. And Steven and I are both very high on him as well after watching him play early this year, and this tape he's put on film throughout the year. So a ton of guys be through those Hard Rock doors on the 23rd as they host Wake Forest for the final game of the season. And this week as well, man, we're gonna have our eyes peeled on to see where all these Miami coaches are visiting, which recruits they're checking in on. So stay tuned to CaneSport.com. We'll have you covered throughout the bye week with a ton of recruiting juice. Moving on to a guy that is committed to Miami, I had the chance to talk with University of Miami commit Luke Nickel and his offensive coordinator, Stevie Jackson in Milton, a guy that, I've had the chance to build a great relationship with Steven as well, ever since, Luke committed to Miami. And we just talked about, their journey together. He coached, Luke since his sophomore year in high school. And he had a pretty funny story, pretty cool story that I thought. He talked about, that first game of the year when they played St. Thomas Aquinas. And, Luke actually went into halftime thinking his thumb was broken, had to get x-rays and things like that. But no matter what, he was going to finish that game, and obviously he did, and kind of led, Milton to a big victory over St. Thomas Aquinas. So a ton of good insight on, Luke's commitment to Miami, Stevie Jackson's, unique relationship with, Coach Shannon Dawson, and just all that good stuff. So make sure to check out that Inside the Lines with Luke Nickel. Steven, just want to get your, quick thoughts on Luke as we get closer to signing day. He officially becomes a Hurricane.
Yeah, so a lot of people probably don't actually know this, but Luke Nickel's offensive coordinator actually took quite a few concepts from Miami's playbook. Apparently, they went down to Miami at a point this fall. Stevie Jackson was able to meet with Shannon Dawson along with Luke Nickel's head coach, and they went ahead and took some of the concepts that Miami was running and kind of included them into their playbook. And it wasn't necessarily hey, we need to make sure that we're getting Luke ready. It was just kind of hey, we think that these are concepts that we can use at the high school level. We think that this really fits our team, this fits our personnel, and kind of what we want to do from a schematic standpoint. I definitely think that has helped Luke kind of start getting ready for the college level though. So I think Miami got a little bit of a two for one there. Because whenever you look at Luke's game tape, I mean, he looks far more advanced than a lot of high school quarterbacks. He looks like a progression thrower. He looks like a guy who can move from left to right. He doesn't necessarily just have to zero in on one matchup and say, hey, my guy's better than their guy. I can just throw the ball up and let him take advantage of it. He looks like a guy who understands how to attack a defense, how to attack different coverages, how to manipulate a defense with his eyes. He's gotten much better manipulating safeties and linebackers with his eyes this year. And I think he's going to be, I think that it's something that's going to translate very, very well to the next level. I think he's one of the highest floor quarterbacks in next year's class. I think that he's a guy who comes in much more ready to play than a lot of other quarterbacks are going to. And, that definitely doesn't I'm definitely not saying that, he might be ready to play his freshman year, because it is incredibly difficult for a true freshman quarterback to come in and immediately be ready to contribute, on a top 25 team, on what's probably going to be a top 10, top 15 roster that expects to compete for championships. But man, I really do think that Luke is going to be an incredibly valuable addition. And at the very, very least, if nothing else, he's going to add a lot of competition to that locker room, because what you see is what you get with Luke. He's calm, he's poised, he's consistent, he's incredibly accurate. I don't think he gets enough credit for his arm, just because he doesn't really have that massive frame, kind of like like a Judd Anderson, where you just expect him to drop back and rip it down the field every single time. But man, he can sling it downfield. He's smart enough to know when to check in and out of different things. And I really can't wait to see him actually start getting snaps at Miami.
Yeah, kudos to Shannon Dawson, that offensive staff, for, really finding Luke Nickel early in the process, identifying, what they liked about him. They said, hey, this is our guy. They stuck with him. I think he was around the 400 range, a 3-star guy, and now he's floating in that top 200 range. So like I said, kudos to Shannon Dawson, those guys, and had a really good time talking with Coach Jackson, talking with Luke about everything, and just his preparation, getting ready for Miami, kind of what they expect from him and Miami staff when he gets down to Coral Gables. So make sure to check that out this morning. A great interview that I think a lot of you guys would really like. So that wraps up what we have today for Good Morning CaneSport. For Stephen Wagner, I'm Izubee Charles. Thank you all for tuning in, and have a great rest of your day.